Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go! I'll start by saying that I'm a mom to a 9-year-old boy. And on that day, we were getting ready for that big bring your parent to school day. You know, the one where parents pretend they are cool enough to step into the world of 4th graders. Yeah, that day. My son was all excited telling me about his life in school, showing me his desk and proudly displaying his science project. I couldn't help but smile at his enthusiasm. We walked into the school together and I could practically feel his pride radiating off him as he showed me around. We barely settled into his classroom when the morning chaos began. Kids were rushing around, parents trying to fit into those tiny desks, and a teacher doing her best to keep everyone in check. I squeezed myself into one of those desks, wondering how they could ever be comfortable, and I tried to look interested as a teacher explained the math lesson. But then amid the numbers and equations, I noticed a commotion outside the classroom. Heads turned, whispers spread, and I just knew something was up. Being the nosy mom I am, I excused myself to go look at what's going on. Can't help it, I am who I am. Nosy. There was this lady, Karen, apparently a parent. And she was like a storm cloud of negativity. She was on a mission, and her target was a poor girl with a prosthetic leg. Now, I didn't know the girl personally, but I'd seen her around whenever I picked up my boy from school. Karen didn't waste any time. She pointed her finger at the girl, yelling about how someone like her shouldn't be around her kid or even in his class. How her prosthetic leg was simply an eyesore. My jaw practically dropped. Who says something like this? The poor girl tried to speak up, but her voice barely made a sound. It was like she was trapped in this horrible situation, wanting to fight back but struggling to find her voice. My heart ached for her. No one should have to endure that kind of cruelty. I couldn't stand by and watch. It was like a switch flipped inside me. I took a step forward, ready to give Karen a piece of my mind. I told her that her behavior was unacceptable, that nobody had the right to treat someone that way, disabled or not. But instead of backing down, Karen turned her fury towards me. It was like poking a hornet's nest. She started yelling at me, accusing me of being a meddler and telling me to mind my own business. I didn't back down though. I couldn't. Not when a helpless kid was being treated so horribly. We went back and forth, and the poor girl just stood there, tears welling up in her eyes. And I could see that she was feeling grateful and maybe guilty that someone was standing up for her. Other parents started to gather around, some looking shocked and others shaking their heads in disbelief at Karen's behavior. One parent, a dad with tattoos and a tough-looking exterior, stepped forward and told Karen to chill out and show some respect. And that's when things escalated in a way none of us could have predicted. Karen decided to make her move. I am not really sure what could have triggered this, but she lunged at the poor girl, with her hand raised to slap her. I was horrified, but before anyone could react, a strong hand grabbed Karen's arm from behind, stopping her in her tracks. I turned to see who it was, and there he was. A man in a military uniform, stern-faced and resolute. He had that aura about him, the kind that makes you know he's not to be messed with. He held onto Karen's wrist like a vice grip, and she let out a scream with a confused expression written all over her face. And then amidst the tension and confusion, a voice cut through the air. It was a disabled girl, and with tears in her eyes she said, "Daddy." The man's look softened as he turned his attention to his daughter. He let go of Karen's arm and walked toward the girl. He embraced his daughter tightly and kissed her gently on her head. Their moment was so wholesome and heartwarming that it brought a lump to my throat. But the man wasn't done. He turned his attention back to Karen, who was still standing there baffled and confused. His expression turned from warmth to anger, and he said in a voice that could chill the air, "Next time I hear that you or your kid gave my girl a hard time, I will put you in a wheelchair myself. Now get the hell out of here." Now, Karen scurried off like a little scared dog. The man watched her go, his eyes never leaving her until she disappeared from sight. And then, as if nothing had happened, he turned back to his daughter, that stern expression replaced by pure love. As the crowd around us started to disperse, the man in the military uniform approached me with a look of gratitude in his eyes. "Thank you for standing up for my daughter. It means a lot," he said. I smiled and shook my head. "No need to thank me, just couldn't let her be treated that way." He nodded as if he understood exactly where I was coming from. We struck up a conversation, two parents brought together by a crazy situation. He told me about his deployment, how he wanted to surprise his daughter on Bring Your Parent to School Day, and boy did he succeed in surprising everyone. We talked for a bit and I could see the pride in his eyes as he looked at his daughter chatting with her classmates. He mentioned that they were headed to the principal's office to report the whole incident, to make sure this wouldn't happen again. And you could bet that the principal was in for an earful. From that moment on, people treated that girl with respect. Nobody dared to mess with her anymore. Even Karen, she would walk the other way when she saw her, avoiding her like the plague. Oh, and by the way, I looked up the guy and he turned out to be a captain. No wonder he was so authoritative. And that's how a day that started with the usual chaos of school events ended with an entitled Karen running for the hills. Who says real life isn't as entertaining as the movies? So my girlfriend and I have this thing. We're foodies, but not just any foodies. We're the kind of foodies who have found our holy grail of taste, an Indian restaurant that's a slice of heaven. Seriously, the flavors that burst from every dish could make angels sing. The catch? It's got a price tag that could make a grown man cry. Now we ain't rolling in dough, pun intended, so we have to be strategic about our orders. A single entree for me, one for her, and we throw in a side of naan bread to share. Because let's face it, Indian cuisine without naan is like a party without music. You just can't do it. But here is where the plot thickens like a well-made curry. You see, my girlfriend has a peculiar habit. She loves to munch on that precious naan without dipping it into her curry. That little piece of bread, fluffy and warm, practically begs to be soaked in that rich sauce. But no, she treats it like a solo act. It irks me, but I let it slide. I mean, relationships are all about compromise after all. We've had this discussion before. I've tried to reason with her, explain that the naan is like a sidekick to the entree, a dynamic duo meant to be together. But she just shrugs it off, saying it's her food and she can eat it however she pleases. Fair enough, I guess. But here is a kicker. It's not just her food. Pet naan is supposed to be a communal experience, darn it. Anyway, fast forward to the other day, we decided to indulge in our beloved Indian feast once again. This time she goes rogue and orders biryani, that fragrant mix of rice and meat that's basically a party in a bowl. I'm secretly excited because, hey, this means the naan is all mine, baby. As we're digging into our meals, she looks at the naan like it's her long-lost lover, and before I know it, she grabs a piece and takes a bite. I am torn between signing defeat and saying something. Well, you guessed it, I said something. I nudged the naan away from her and put on my best really face. You're having biryani, babe. You don't need the naan. Well, let's just say she didn't take kindly to what I did. She shot me a look that could curdle yogurt and retorted, I can eat whatever I want with my food. It's none of your business. And then came the words I hadn't anticipated. If you're gonna be this way, I won't pay for my share next time. You're being a greedy jerk. Damn, that escalated quickly, didn't it? I wasn't prepared for the onslaught of accusations. Here I am thinking I'm just being practical, but now I'm the bad guy. Though I decided to stand my ground, I pointed out that she had rice in her biryani, a carbo-load extravaganza, and didn't need the naan. I was just trying to keep the balance, you know? She huffed, grabbed her plate, and stormed off to our bedroom. So there I was sitting at the table with a half-eaten curry and a sulking vibe. I couldn't help but feel a pang of regret. Should I have just let her enjoy her biryani and the naan bread? I needed an outsider perspective, and I turned to my friends, and let me tell you, their opinions were as diverse as a buffet spread. Friend A had my back. Then came friend B and took the opposite stand, branding me the dreaded greedy jerk. Hours have passed since the biryani incident, and my girlfriend's silence is deafening. I've tried making peace offerings in the form of a apologetic texts, heart emojis, and even sharing bread-related memes to lighten the mood. But alas, the digital abyss remains silent. So where does this leave us? Am I the entitled one for how I acted here? And now some comments on the post. Someone saying, "You are a gigantic jerk. You don't get to decide for someone how they eat their food. If you're splitting the bill, she gets to eat some bread. Regardless of if you think it's being wasted as eaten, go say you're sorry before you're single." Another commenter adds, "You are the jerk, 100%. Who gives a damn if she eats it with a curry or not? And too much carbs? So you and your friend are now trying to dictate your girlfriend's diet? I hope she gets out of there. I can only imagine how you are about everything else in your lives when this is such a small thing to react this negatively towards." A third commenter goes with, "Oh my god, are you actually policing the way your girlfriend eats her food? Definitely you're the jerk. You both paid for the meal. You both paid for a main and a side of naan. Unless you paid extra to have that naan bread all to yourself, you're being a massive jerk to assume she doesn't get to have her half because she didn't order a traditional dip the bread in its meal. Yes, you're being a greedy jerk. You want more naan? Order an extra side of naan. You don't get to cheat her of half a side that she paid for just because you don't approve of the way she eats her bread." Sorry guys, but it was actually a little bit too late when I figured out that it actually was being pronounced non and not nan, so yeah, my bad. Sorry about that. Hi, let's call him Joe. I have to call him something, the man I ruined, but I can't call him by his real name, so let's call him Joe. And Joe was a wife beater. I was hired by Joe's brother-in-law, the brother of the wife that Joe beat. My client was also Joe's ex-business partner. Aside from the whole "you beat up my sister" thing, my client had another beef with Joe, a serious business beef. My client took it to court and gave me the case to handle. Joe and his lawyers fought me long and hard. Joe was confident that his crap and outright perjury would carry the day. It had always worked before. His nonsense and his fists had won him a good settlement with his ex-wife, free of child support. So maybe he thought that the threats and lies would carry the day once more. But he was wrong. And after the trial, I had a judgment against him. A big judgment, far bigger than he could pay. Joe twisted and he turned and he shimmied and shaked. But after a while, I'd located and taken all his assets. It was easy really. Joe had no thought of consequences, and so he didn't lawyer up until it was too late. If one of my clients ever sues you, you're in trouble because my clients lawyer up before they even know your name. But Joe didn't lawyer up until the process server threw the papers at his feet, and by then it was far too late. I went through Joe's finances like a meat grinder, and after a while Joe had one property left, a house, and he clung to that house for it was rented out, and his sole source of income. Joe lived in the unfinished basement and he survived on what the upstairs tenants paid him. He cashed the rent checks at payday loan places, paying hefty fees, but it was worth it because he knew that I'd garnish any bank account that he opened. Joe managed to hide his rental place from me for a while because he owned it through a numbered company, but my investigator found him one day and followed him home. Joe self-repped his way through the next stage, which took a couple of years, while I punctured his corporate veils and his sad efforts at a fraudulent conveyance. But in the end, I had his last house, the house where he lived in the unfinished basement, and Joe stepped out one day to get a pack of cigarettes, and when he came back, the sheriff had changed the locks. Can my client at least live in the basement? Joe's lawyer said to me, pro bono, because by this point Joe had nothing to pay lawyers. I knew the pro bono guy. He practiced law nearby. As I was talking to him, I could see pro bono guy's office window across the parking lot from my office tower window. Ask the purchaser. I said, it is out of my hand. And it was. I told Joe's lawyer that the new owner, a nominee, one of my client's employees, wouldn't let him back into his crappy basement apartment. Joe, a man who had owned this and that here and there and all over town, had just lost the last thing he owned on earth, except for his truck. He still had his truck left. Joe's truck was this big gas guzzling beast that he drove around in. It was too old and too frail to be worth seizing, so I let Joe keep it. And I was glad I did that because now the truck was where Joe slept. Until he made a mistake, and he lost his truck too. He lost his truck the day I got a phone call from the tenants at the house that Joe used to own. He came back and parked his truck across the driveway, the tenant said, adding that Joe had gone nuts. He parked his truck there in a rage out of spite, and then walked into town saying he'd be back later that day to sleep in his truck. "Can you get around the truck?" I asked. The tenant could not. The driveway was blocked, and I called one of the tow truck drivers that I used to defend back in my criminal lawyer days. And in a couple of hours that truck was gone and parked somewhere else. Somewhere special, accordance with my specific instructions. My guy wants his truck back, the pro bono lawyer said the next day when he called me. "Not happening," I said. I stood in my office 15 floors above the parking lot and looked down where I imagined my pro bono counterpart was standing in his office facing the same lot. "But you have no right to the truck," he said. "He has no right to block a man's driveway," I replied. It was terrible, really standing up high, pronouncing words that took away a man's final asset, the last thing he owned on earth. "Are you really gonna make me go to court over this?" said the pro bono guy. "Do what you gotta do," I said, and the pro bono guy said his client was coming in the next day to sign an affidavit, and then they were going to court to get the truck back, but I was unconcerned. The next day was bright and the sun was shining and it was 9 a.m. as I looked out the window and sipped my coffee. My phone rang, I picked it up, and it was a pro bono man. "Why didn't you tell me that Joe's truck was parked right outside my office?" His voice was tight, and I could tell that he must have been shaking with anger. "Is that so?" I said, staring out at Joe's truck parked 15 stories below me. "How careless of my bailiff to leave the truck where your client could easily take it back. I really must speak to him." "Very funny. My client's going to sue." "No, he isn't. He's going to get in that truck and drive away, right now." I told my tow guy to fill up the tank and he gave it an oil change too. "Tell your client to get in his truck and drive off, and that if I ever see that truck again, I'll seize it, to satisfy the rest of my client's judgment." Pro bono guy tried to argue, but I was firm. Then I put the phone down, and I topped my coffee. A few minutes later, Joe walked out of his lawyer's office and over to his truck. As he walked, I saw that there was no longer a bounce to his step, that joy had gone out of him. Joe was not the first guy I ruined, and he won't be the last, but he is the only one whose final ruin I witnessed from on high from my office, and it was one of the most powerful experiences of my life, watching a man walk to his truck, knowing that I had stripped him of everything else he had, and that he owed his possession of his last asset, his truck, to my mercy. Joe drove away, his big, ancient truck spilling clouds of smoke from the exhaust, and I was pretty sure I'd never hear from him again. And I never did. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching and see you next time.